Hello, everyone. I hope your week's off to a great start. We take a look now at topic number 3 on our course syllabus. It is a discussion about ethics and some of the ethical considerations that we have to be aware of as professional educators. And so we want to begin that conversation and discussion with you today. Now, for the first couple of weeks, we know that we have had an overview in very general terms of legal concepts, legal terms, legal structure for education from the U.S. Constitution, moving forward to your local school board policy, and even your local school board policy and how that impacts your work as a professional educator. Today, we're going to extend that a little bit because we're going to be looking at ethical considerations. And we talk a lot about ethics, and I've always felt like it was much like the golden rule. And that is that you would want to treat other people the way that you like to be treated. Probably a good idea. But there are some policy considerations, legal considerations that we need to take a look at when we talk about ethics in our profession as professional educators. Now, sometimes behavior can be legal but unethical, and sometimes behavior can be illegal and unethical. And we generally handle those differently, but both areas present concern for us as professionals. I made the comment a couple of weeks ago that not being disparaging to any group of employees or profession, but in general, educators are expected to operate at a higher moral reasoning level than what you might see with a greeter at Walmart. And that is where we begin our conversation today. So remember, it can be legal and unethical. It can be illegal behavior and unethical behavior as well. And so if we take a look at a conversation about ethics and how we should behave as professional educators, then there are some things that we need to consider that sort of are a framework or a study of ethics. This can carry over to any profession, but we're going to focus on our work as professional educators. And so one of the things that's important is for you to understand that there are ethical principles that we abide by. So ethical principles are grounded, much like the golden rule, in things like integrity, honesty, respect, fairness, and empathy. If you think about that, if you refer back to Ron Clark's book about all I ever wanted to learn, I learned in kindergarten, sounds familiar. That integrity, honesty, respect, fairness, and empathy are important principles for us to consider. Now, one of the things we are required to do as an educator is to create a safe and inclusive environment for everyone. So every student in your classroom deserves to feel safe, protected, respected, and included in the learning environment. Everybody comes to us from a different ability level to function in the classroom. And I had a professor once, years and years ago, and when he taught the class, he actually taught the class, I think he was around 90 years old. He's one of the most respected coaches and educators in northeastern North Carolina at that time, Leon Brogdon. And he would always say this at the beginning of every lecture. And every class we had with him for a full semester, this was his take. In every child, there's a spark of genius. And in some kids, we just have to look harder to find it. And as educators, That's our role. We have to look harder to fight it. And from an ethical perspective, we have an obligation to do that. And everybody needs to feel included and involved and engaged in a learning environment. And everybody arrives at the front door of the school with different challenges, a different home life, different background, and things that they're facing on that given day. But our day and our challenge as educators, whether you're in the classroom or you're counseling or you're working as a school administrator, is to make them feel safe, respected, and included. One of the things that we hear the most about that you'll watch on the evening news is about maintaining professional boundaries. So we have to build positive relationships with students, and there has to be appropriate boundaries. You can build relationships, you can be supportive, you can be encouraging, you can be engaged and involved with students, but there have to be boundaries. So you want to avoid situations that could be perceived as favoritism, and always prioritize the well-being and the best interest of your students. You see, I think it's a blight on our profession in the evening news when the reporter comes on and reports of a teacher or a coach or anyone who's a trusted school person who engages in appropriate relationships with a child, and is heartbreaking. And about a year ago, the legislature in North Carolina updated the law regarding the punishment and how things should be reported when there is inappropriate behavior on the part of an educator in terms of relationships. So there are legal requirements for all administrators, for all teachers, that we must adhere to. There are reporting requirements and there are behavior requirements. All of that is rooted in not only legal requirements and behavior, but also what is ethically correct and the right thing to do for our kids. One of the things that we consider is ensuring academic integrity. We should teach our students to take pride in their work, to cite sources properly if they're in the upper grades. And now we fight the battle with AI and what that's going to mean. And that presents a whole new challenge for educators and for those that are learning in your classroom, because it's awfully easy just to click on AI and ask a question and get a result written or a paper written for you that you can use. But you generally get out of something what you put into it, and the same thing is true about learning. And so that's a new challenge that we all face as educators, is how do we handle the AI challenge in terms of maintaining academic integrity. So we should discourage cheating and plagiarism and encourage honesty and intellectual growth. Those are, from an ethical perspective, the right things that we should do. As educators, we're required to respect confidentiality. Students often confide in you, and we have an obligation, unless it is a situation that will impact their safety or well-being, that we should work to maintain that confidentiality and guide them in a productive pathway forward. If there's a concern for a child's legitimate safety or even any question, then we should report that to our counselors or our principals or assistant principal and get other opinions and help as we move forward in addressing those issues for a child. So how do we navigate ethical dilemmas when we're faced with those educators? And probably the best thing that we could do is always put the welfare of your students first. If you always think about what's best for my students first, in general, you go in a more positive direction, and it's not as the likelihood that you could run into other issues in that process. Now, we do have an obligation as an educator to make sure that kids are treated justly and fairly and equitably as members of your classroom and members of your school. And we go about doing that by being positive change agents, by advocating for these things in our school and making sure in our classroom that everybody feels like they're treated the same, regardless of any other factors, economics, race, gender, anything that would make a kid feel like they're not treated fairly. We need to eliminate those type things from our schools and our classrooms. And one that you may not think about in terms of ethical considerations is professional development and reflection. And that's what we're doing right now in the district, having these conversations with you and talking about how we grow as professionals. We should be continuous learners. Continuous professional development and self-reflection are essential for us to grow as an educator. And I would especially encourage you that when you're faced with an ethical dilemma, what should I do? What's the right thing to do for my children? What's the right thing to do as a professional? That you should take time and reflect and seek advice and counsel to make those decisions to make sure that we get them right. Now, I mentioned the North Carolina State Board of Education and its code of conduct and ethics for educators. You can find that in the North Carolina General Statutes, and I've provided you that resource as part of our work together so that you can locate that information. It was actually originally written and codified in 1998. So those type ethical considerations and that policy's been in place for a long time. One of the things that from a legal perspective that you look at is, can the North Carolina Code of Educator Ethics, can it have an impact on my evaluation? Can it have an impact on my employment? And yes, it can. Someone who operates unethically can be disciplined, can be evaluated in that area on the evaluation instrument. But not only that, in serious cases that actually damage learning at the school, create a negative environment, create a situation where there's not an esprit de corps among staff, and the person works against the school and the mission and the values and the vision as a whole. Actually, in some cases, people who find themselves in that situation can be not only disciplined, but actually removed from employment at your school and district. So if you look at the policy that's in the State Board of Ed policy manual, and it's codified there in statute as well, some of the things that we just mentioned in general terms about ethics are also mentioned in this policy, but some of them get to be more specific. So I'll provide you a copy of this, and I want you to read through it. You've seen it before. Your school district probably has a copy or even a video or some training on ethics for all new employees, and some reviews that have to take place for more senior employees, just to make everybody aware that our ethical behavior and the standards for educators is very high, and we need to be aware and vigilant and make sure that we are doing everything that we can to have the most positive learning environment for our students the most positive work environment for our teachers and staff members, and that we are able to achieve together through that positive environment the true mission of the school district, and that is to provide the very best and appropriate education that we can for every child that we contact each and every day in our classrooms, in our schools, and in the district as a whole. So when you look at that policy, what you're looking at is commitment to the student, commitment to the school and the system, and commitment to the profession. And again, those things are actually spelled out in more detail. I'm not going to go through each one, but I want you to take time to read that policy, and it'll be posted in there for your ease of access on our course page. And there are standards of professional conduct, and standards are there to establish mandatory prohibitions and requirements for educators. So those things that are prohibited and those things that are required in terms of our behavior. And it goes on to say that professional educators shall adhere. It doesn't say may adhere, we'd like for you to adhere. It says shall. And when you see the word shall in the law, then that means there is no option. You shall fulfill the standards of professional conduct contained in the rule. And any intentional act or omission that violates the standards is prohibited. And that's where we get into the legal carryover of can you be evaluated and disciplined and even terminated based on your behavior, even if it's an ethical consideration that may not rise to the level of an illegal or criminal offense. And that is certainly something that we have to consider. So if you're an educator, then what are some of the questions that you could ask yourself that would help you make good decisions, good ethical decisions? You know, it will be my hope that everybody has that good moral compass, that you're grounded in that, and that you feel comfortable in making sure that all kids are treated, created fairly and equally, and they're excited about learning, and you do everything within your power to make that happen. But what are some questions that we might ask ourselves as educators that help bring these things into focus? Those original tenets of ethical behavior. What questions can we ask that would bring these tenets into our thought and really how we discern what is ethical and good ethical behavior? So I want to ask a couple of those questions, and I provide these for you as well. How do you ensure fairness and equity in the classroom, especially considering diverse backgrounds and abilities among students? And I mentioned earlier, what about economic factors? What about race and gender and religious belief? And all those things come into play. Did you know that sometimes those beliefs can actually be in conflict with your personal beliefs? And if so, how do you make the right ethical decision for the students that you teach? Remember, it really is about always doing what is in the best interest of your students. What measures do you take to maintain student confidentiality and privacy, particularly when dealing with sensitive information? That's important. We don't need to be down discussing with everybody else, can you believe Johnny or Sally told me this? Can you believe that this is going on in their family or in their neighborhood? We need to maintain that confidentiality and treat them with that respect, and then act on that information in a way that is appropriate, either by giving counsel and advice to the child, or when legally required to do so, make sure that you're reporting to a counselor, a social worker, an AP, or your principal to make sure that the well-being of that child is taken care of at all times. How do you handle conflicts of interest, such as when personal relationships intersect with professional responsibilities? How do you handle that? What if the child that you're teaching in your classroom is your neighbor and you know them on a personal level? How do you handle that in a classroom? And do you handle it in such a way that all the other children realize that everybody in the classroom is treated equally and justly and have the same opportunities for learning and success? What steps do you take to create an inclusive and welcoming environment for all students, regardless of their race, ethnicity, gender, religion? Remember, those things are important. People bring different circumstances to us when they come in the front door every day. We have to be able to meet them where they are and find a way for them to be successful. Remember, in every child, there's a spark of genius. We just have to look harder in some of them to find it. And we may have to provide more support and more support resources. But every kid should feel positive about themselves and feel positive about an opportunity for success. How do you navigate the balance between fostering independence and providing necessary support who may be struggling either academically or emotionally? And we see that not everybody arrives with the same ability level. And you're working with each one to make sure with that individualized educational plan, you're working with each one to make sure that they reach their maximum potential. Everybody's maximum potential is not the same, but our obligation is to help each child reach their maximum potential. And do we do that? And are you committed to that and making sure that that happens? What strategies do you employ in the classroom to address bullying or harassment or discrimination in your classroom or in your school community? Remember, one of the ethical principles that we discussed at the outset is it's our responsibility to make sure that all of our children, all of our staff members feel safe, feel supported, feel protected, and we have an ethical obligation to do that. And if you're the leader, if you're the school leader, if you're a district leader, if you're a superintendent, that should be one of your top priorities to make sure that we are safe, that it is a high priority, if not the highest priority, and that we make everyone in our buildings feel safe and secure and supported and protected. Those are fundamental because when you don't feel safe, when you don't feel secure, when you're hungry with a food insecurity, when all these things are in place, you cannot learn at your maximum potential. And we have to get those roadblocks out of the way so we can teach and we can learn and our kids can be successful. How do you ensure academic integrity and discourage cheating and plagiarism among your students? And I mentioned this issue with AI, and there's going to continue to be more discussion about that. Districts are going to adopt policies on how to use AI and what that looks like for you in the classroom, whether you're in the elementary school or you're in the high school. Those things are going to be important for you as we navigate that. So all of us, myself included, can do a lot to learn more about our academic integrity and how we maintain that, how we eliminate cheating, and how we handle plagiarism. And one of the most important things is to make a child or a student feel good about their work. And again, realizing that you get out of something what you put into it. And really praising and working hard with those who are really making the effort to do the right thing and to put in the time to do a good job academically. Use all the tools, use them in the correct way. But we always have to value independent learning and thought and those challenges that help people turn on that light bulb so they understand what it feels like rather than just being handed the information or pulling it from somewhere or another student even and not understanding that they can be successful if they work hard. How do you handle situations where there's a disagreement between your personal beliefs or values and those of your school or community? Well, it goes back to, I think, putting the best interest of students first. We look at it from an academic perspective, from a social perspective, from an emotional perspective, and those things you need to remember are important. What steps do you take to remain culturally competent and respectful of diverse populations in your teaching practices? We, depending on where your school is located, there is a lot of diversity in our schools, and that diversity continues to grow. It presents challenges. Take time in your professional learning to find skills and strategies that help you be more effective with certain diverse type populations and gives you the confidence to do well. And realize that that diversity that's brought into your classroom is valuable and can be used in a positive way for learning. How do you prioritize the well-being and safety of your students, both inside and outside the classroom? And those are, it's what I mentioned a little bit earlier. I think it's fundamental. I don't think we do well at anything unless all of us feel safe and secure and supported. Those are just a few questions from an ethical perspective that we can consider as professional educators. And we really need to take a look at that and begin to reflect and think about, how do we handle our students? Do our grading practices, do they reflect subjective type scoring where a kid's personality or something could come into play? Or is it more objective, where it's more about how you are able to perform regardless of those other personality traits and those kind of things? So did you know that you can actually create your own model for moral or ethical decision making? And so I'll give you a few thoughts about that, and then I'll share this with you as well. Respect for autonomy. When you're going through that file that's in your head and you're trying to make the right decision, whether it's with your colleagues, your school, your administrator, your district, or the children that you teach, the kids in your grade level, we have to know that by nature that all of us have a right to a certain degree to make choices and decisions. And we generally tend to flourish in that kind of environment. Benefits is promoting the well-being of others. We have an obligation to promote the well-being of others and to prevent harm whenever we possibly can. Non-malfeasance. This is the process of avoiding causing harm to others. It involves minimizing the potential for harm and considering the risk of our actions or decisions. Justice, as we mentioned, pertains to fairness and equity. Veracity is about honest and transparent communication with everyone, avoiding deception or misleading others intentionally. We all value the truth. We all value transparency, even the students that we teach. Fidelity, being faithful to commitments and promises and obligations. It's real easy. Keep your word. Do what you say you're going to do. Mean what you say and say what you mean. Be forthcoming, upfront. Those things are a part of fidelity to your word, fidelity to your actions. You know, we really need to practice what we preach and think about that in terms of making your own decisions. And as I mentioned, there are other factors that come into play, cultural, religious, and situational factors. You know, there are books about situational leadership. If you're a leader, either a teacher leader or a school leader, that the situation sometimes dictates what you're able to do in terms of decision making. Be aware of that, but always make sure that in situations that it's ethically correct. And one thing is to take a look at precedent, to take a look at how people are treated fairly, and then make decisions that are in the best interest of our children. So those are just some of the principles of ethical decision making, and I'm going to provide you some of these things, some of the questions, some of the models, some other things for you to think about just in your own personal classroom or school, your own perspective in terms of decision making. And then, you know, I think that when we think about ethics, we don't necessarily think about our own professional development. And I want you to encourage you to think about that, to think about reflective practice when there are these moral and ethical dilemmas that we face, and maybe even think about how you can build some of these ethical principles into your teaching and your work on a daily basis. And so those are some thoughts about our topic 3 on ethical and really moral considerations for us as professional educators. Is probably the fundamental basis of how we treat other humans, whether they are our student, our colleague, our supervisors, or our neighbor. Really need to give thought to that, because the way we treat each other and those expectations that we have for making sure that we are always looking after the well-being of our students and the people in our charge, those things are so critical for each and every one of us. If you'll take a look at the course topic page, then you'll see some of the resources come forward, and hopefully you'll be able to put them in your professional file and use them moving forward, and give some thought to those types of decisions that require ethical considerations on your part, so that you can always do the best, be the best, and make the best ethical and moral decision for all those that you come in contact. That's expected of us as professional educators. In many cases, it is required of us as professional educators, and we should stand up and be front and center in making sure that everyone in our profession does a good job with this type of ethical decision making. Thank you. I'll talk with you soon. Check out the course resource page, and if you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.